In the copy nearby are excerpts of a speech by Janet Yellen late yesterday. And when Fed chairmen have important things to say, they do it after markets are closed, so as not to shock the marketplace too much. And this big speech, and it's immense, follows a Fed meeting last week in which the Fed took a pass. The temptation is to overinterpret, maybe underinterpret, but Yellen's trying to lay the groundwork for the rate increase to come, and at the same time fend off the hawks who were inside the Fed who wanted to hike earlier and or immediately. But the speech is thoughtful. I like Janet Yellen. I've followed her career. I've read all of her speeches for years and years. She has a charming trait in that she has a sense of humor about herself, which Bernanke had also. And in high places, a sense of humor about oneself is protective. If you're aware of your own errors and the days when your shirt is stuffed, it's a good thing. What troubles me about the speech is the thing is a time capsule. The whole speech is Jurassic Park. It's the Fed thinking from 1990. There is no mention of some things that I think are important about the nature of the American economy. Now, the Fed has no narrow tools. That is, it doesn't have the power to help any particular sector with the possible exception of housing. The Fed has to act on the economy as a whole to deal with the prospect of inflation as a whole or a recession as a whole. But some things that have changed in the economy that simply weren't in the mix as little as 10 years ago. The first of these is the hideous cost of health care. Obamacare added to the insured, but if my family makes more than $75,000 a year, and my deductible just went from $1,000 to $5,000, how can I tell that I'm insured? And where am I going to get $5,000? And that deductible increase, on top of a staggering 3 or 4 times the rate of inflation increased in the cost of healthcare, subtracts demand from the economy. Now, theoretically, healthcare demand is demand, and so it's in the aggregate statistics. But a cost increase of that kind impairs the ability of households to be safe, to save money for tomorrow, to save money for a car, to save money for retirement, or for college. We have more than doubled student loans outstanding in 5 years. The default rate on student loans is now in double digits. It's worse than, it's like subprime mortgages. And there's a link to healthcare. If you take apart state budgets, you will see a nearly 1-for-1 decrease in spending on higher education and increase in spending on congressional unfunded mandates forced on the states. We see in housing very clearly that everyone speaks to an inventory shortage nationwide, and yet prices are rising at about a 5% annual clip. It isn't rocket science to think, wait a minute, if we're in an economic recovery and inventory is scarce and we're not building enough homes, then prices ought to be going up fast enough to get builders to build them. Not happening. That says a huge fraction of American youth is impaired. Anything but overheating in some inflationary way. And the rest of the stuff is overseas, which never really mattered to the United States. And Yellen, as bright and good as she is, there's very little detailed mention of what's going on overseas and its impact on the United States, both in terms of our economic growth and in terms of the impact that Fed rate hikes would have for overseas economies in the future. Anyhow, enough of my arguments. So this week's piece is more on the philosophical ground. A week from today, we get September's job numbers. A week from yesterday, we get the ISM data on manufacturing in September. We get flash reports on September. My hunch is that if those reports are strong, the Fed may come in October. People get all hung up on when the Fed's going to have a meeting, and I've explained to the outside world now for about 30 years that they do have telephones. They don't have to have a meeting. If the data are good, and if there's no new international market upset, everything in Yellens Speech says they're coming at some point this year. Now they've been saying that for a year and not proceeding, but they're at this point just about out of ground. So next Friday's going to matter a lot. If the job stats are another 200,000 jobs, let alone an increase in wages, the Fed can come at any moment, and nobody knows what happens after they do. On the other hand, if the number's lousy, then we go all the way back to square one. On that thought, have a nice weekend.